What I'd like to do is explain the term inflation tax. After all, this website is called inflationtaxthreat.com, and I do realize that the word inflation and the word tax don't seem to go or belong together at all, because inflation is understood by most to be the natural rise in prices with time. Just things cost more and more over time. And a tax is a mechanism where basically the government takes money from us and to use that money for various programs and spending purposes. Things like the sales tax, personal income tax, property tax, things like that. So why would I put those two terms together? And the reason is because that's what inflation is. Inflation is not natural. Inflation is an intentional tax, just another one of the many forms of tax. And the natural question then is, well, what is being taxed? You don't recall seeing it on the bottom of a receipt showing you've paid X amount of dollars for the inflation tax, or it's not on your personal income tax return forms showing how much income tax or inflation tax you've been paying. So how is it a tax, and how is it collected from us? Well, our money itself has been designed to be taxed. And so the reason things cost more with time is because money becomes worth less with time. And the reason money becomes worth less with time is because of the excessive production of money itself. And that has the effect of removing value from your existing money, transferring it to the government and the sources of government spending. Now, don't worry about trying to fully absorb all of that right now. Let me back up, though, with evidence what I'm saying here about inflation being a tax. And to do so, I'm going to read from an exchange between a U.S. congressman and the chairman of the Federal Reserve, which the Federal Reserve is the U.S. central bank. And it was in the summer of 2008, and U.S. Congressman Dr. Ron Paul was asking the Federal Reserve Chairman, Ben Bernanke, basically this line of questioning, something like this: I maintain that inflation is a tax, and you, talking about the Federal Reserve, are probably the biggest taxer in the country. So every time people go and they complain about these higher prices, they should say to themselves, I'm paying a tax. So I maintain that inflation is an unfair tax, a regressive tax. It hurts the poor. It hurts retired people more. And so I'd like you to comment on this. Is this completely off base, or is there really something to this? Every time we see the cost of living going up, that we are indirectly paying a tax. And the reply from the chairman was, Congressman, I couldn't agree with you more that inflation is a tax. Inflation is a tax. And it might take a while to wrap your mind around that concept, but just let me give one more definitive piece of evidence here. And it actually goes back to May of 1977, an article in Fortune magazine, and the title of that article was called How Inflation Swindles the Equity Investor. And here's the quote: The arithmetic makes it plain that inflation is a far more devastating tax than anything that has been enacted by our legislature. Now, who wrote that article? Warren Buffett wrote that article. Inflation is a tax, and the reason that this website is called Inflation Tax Threat is because there are a number of factors that are lining up that clearly point to inflation being a risk to us, a very significant risk to us all in the future. And the Great Depression, during that time, there was something called deflation that was going on, and there was bank failures that were happening. And after 1965, there was a period of time where, through the 70s, where there was really high inflation, and now we're in a unique time where we're seeing things like bank failures and massive money being thrown at the financial system and at the economy to stimulate it, and all these different kinds of things. So every time period is unique, but there are so many factors right now that are clearly pointing to the inflation tax threatening to rise significantly. And basically, when that tax rises significantly, what it means is the value of your money is yanked from you at a faster and faster pace. And there's really specific things that you need to do. Thankfully, they're pretty easy to do in the end when you understand what it is and why you need to do that. If you haven't already done so, I'd recommend go to the home page, enter your email address, and gain access to the file and the video commentary on that file, because this will connect well with what I've said right here. And of course, beyond that, feel free to explore this website. And I would also want to direct you towards the report section of the website, talking about the report that I've written. It is a paid report, but it expands on this in a very logical progression, and I think in a very useful fashion, and gives my opinion of the actions I feel that are critical for you to take to protect yourself against the inflation tax threat.